everyone, and welcome to another live stream with Utah Business. I'm Elle Griffin. I'm the editor-in-chief of Utah Business, and today we are doing a live stream in partnership with Utah Clean Air, and we have Thom Carter, who's the executive director of Utah Clean Air. We have Britton Bettridge, who is the director of business operations at Leaders for Clean Air, and we have James Campbell, who is the director of innovations and sustainability policy at Rocky Mountain Power. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Thank you, Ellie.
So today we're talking about electrification, and this is something that is very top of mind for a lot of people today, especially because we happened to have this crazy thing called COVID happen this year, and everybody stopped driving out of nowhere, and suddenly everybody had this vision of a utopia that could exist if we just maybe solved a few issues, and one of the ways that people are really looking to solve those is by electrification. In the last 2 quarters, we've seen gasoline powered cars kind of tank on the stock market, electric cars really skyrocketing, e-bikes really skyrocketing, and so I wanted to just start by talking about that, like what has happened in the first half of this year that has maybe changed things for the way we look at clean air and electrification.
I'll jump in with that. Right, if we look at Utah's unique air quality problem, right? It starts with geography and then weather and then emissions. And because of that geography and weather, we get this lid that sits on top of us and creates those inversions. And we have to be cognizant of our own emission space. We can't solve geography or weather, but we can adjust our emissions and reduce our emissions to be part of the air quality solution. What we like to say is in our efforts to clear the air, there are no perfect answers, but there are practical solutions. But to your point, Al, in March, when there was that stay safe, stay home directive by the governor and the color code system was put in place and we went red statewide, we saw a drastic shift in traffic, right? Everybody's working from home. According to UDOT and WFRC, there was a 40% drop in cars on the road, and then we also saw a 40% reduction in just emissions. And we didn't just see that in Utah, right? You've seen the maps across the globe where like dolphins were swimming in through Venice, right? It's been crazy. And when we recognize that when we reduce emissions, it becomes very, very good for us. And electric vehicles are a real part of that solution, and we've come very, very far in the technology, right? It's just not all about a Leaf or a Tesla. We'll see Ford has reported and announced that an F-150, the most popular vehicle in America, will have there'll be electric F-150 in early 21, along with a Mustang, and additional manufacturers are coming out with more and more opportunities. So what has been fascinating is the state has partnered with the utility and other great organizations to help solve some of the short-term and long-term struggles that have kept people from purchasing these vehicles. And that goes along the lines of range anxiety, where when people come to me and say, well, look, the vehicles are becoming more and more affordable, there's a larger range of vehicles, much more opportunity, but I don't know where I'm going to get my next charge. I don't know what's going to happen and where I can do this. We can reduce these emissions, right? These tailpipes emissions, because an electric vehicle is basically driving an iPhone. It's so advanced, so much technology, but your battery is a big part of this. One of the conversations we constantly have, I have it with James, I have it with Britton, I have it with the state, is think about how people respond when their phone gets to 50% and then 20%. Talk about panic. Now, and that's just your phone, right? Think about where people are when their vehicle is at 50% or 20%. We've got to find a way to make it so accessible, so many opportunities for people to have confidence that they'll be able to get from point A to point B. And granted, as battery lives get longer, 300, 350, 400 miles, that confidence will be there. They can get from point A to point B and home. And that will help solve some of these problems, make electrification, electric vehicles, a real practical solution in the long run. So COVID has provided us with a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, but it also provided us an opportunity to shift the way we think and provided a few silver linings. And one of those things is people have been able to visualize what significant reduced mobile emissions can be, and we can get there through electrification.
This is James. I'll jump in and say one of the observations that COVID has introduced is we're seeing a shift in the way goods are delivered now. That's been a big change, where before people would go to grocery stores and Costco and go shopping or restaurants, but now we're actually having those goods and foods delivered to them. And so that actually represents a pretty seismic shift in the way goods are transported around, and the necessity to start putting in distribution centers. But one of those opportunities also that sets up from an electrification standpoint is those types of uses, those vehicles that are needed to do those kind of short trips, but high volume and highly frequent trips. Electric vehicles can fit within that. It really kind of sets that up really nicely. And to kind of echo what Thom was talking about with some of that range anxiety, not only do we need to make sure we can address some of the long distance ranges, but we also need to start thinking about, can we put in infrastructure for delivery trucks and put in infrastructure for even passenger vehicles, like folks that were used to doing Lyft and Uber are now doing DoorDash and deliveries for Costco. And can we do we have the appropriate infrastructure for them to start making those choices? Because I have a feeling that shift is permanent, that we're going to see these increased types of deliveries kind of even, I'm an optimist, post-COVID. And so that's something that I've been addressing and working on, and we're pretty excited about the opportunities and the potential there, especially where we can electrify those types of delivery.
And to add to that, too, WFRC refers to this, and WFRC, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, and Ted Nolan, the deputy director over there, has done some really phenomenal work on this over the last 4 or 5 months. He's calling that the great localization, where we've seen a 40% increase in e-commerce. And even that opportunity where it used to be, I'm going to live in a bedroom community and commute downtown. Well, now I'm just going to live and work and shop. Everything's going to be localized around my home as kind of my primary workplace as well, right? Where we've had this great conversation and shift to telework, right? We've done some really strong data about telework. And so if I don't know if I'm going to need 300, 350, 400 miles of EV for my personal use, I may need a short battery to get to and from Walmart, or unless, to James' point, my job as a Lyft or Uber driver has shifted to be a Uber Eats driver or a delivery driver, because that gig economy has become a bit of a change. But really, we saw a 90% increase in bicycle use, 100% increase in open space use. And so that localization, that great localization that's taken place over the last 6 months, really can provide an opportunity for electrification. Before, when people were commuting 20, 30, 40 minutes every day and saying, well, I just don't know if electric vehicles for me. Now it's, well, even from a petroleum standpoint, I'm only filling up my gas tank once a month. Well, if that's the case, and you only get 350, 400, 450 miles on your gas tank, think about what that means for electricity.
Yeah, to go along with the whole conversation, I think people are just being more mindful about how sustainable they are. Just like what Thom was saying, people are more mindful. They've found that they don't need to go all the way into the city to go shopping. They can do it in their own little community. And then since they've kind of changed their lifestyle that way, then it goes into the range anxiety, is saying, hey, I don't need a car that's going to be going 400 miles in range. And then people start to realize their sustainability, and as well, as with all the different new deliveries, the logistics industry, whatever you want to call it, people are starting to become more comfortable with this new technology. It's starting to become not so new and just more regular. And that's when you see the EV, the electric vehicle market start to explode, especially with a lot of the new cars coming to market, up and coming. People are just more comfortable with it. People want to be cutting edge. Utah's cutting edge in their tech community. So we're going to see this, not only has it ramped up recently, but it's going to really ramp up in the coming years.
It's interesting, and I do want to mention to our attendees that you can definitely submit questions in the Q&A, and you can also in the chat start any conversations if you'd like. But I just want to come in on what you guys are talking about and ask a question. Is electrification the answer? Because I know it takes something, I read something about it takes 30 years or something for there to be a turnover in car behavior because people keep their cars for long periods of time, and then they have a whole used market. And so the buying new cars kind of takes a while for it to turn over. There's still not very many electric cars on the road when it comes to gas powered in terms of versus gas powered cars. But when we had this big switch this spring and suddenly we saw the air quality improve, it wasn't that people were driving electric cars, it was that people weren't driving. And I almost wonder if that is a better solve than electrification. It is to Tom's point, the localization efforts, and to James' point, most everything is now all delivery now, and it's less about the individual traveling 30 miles to work and 15 miles to the gym and 15 minutes to the grocery store because they're using that all in now a smaller space.
Well, one of the challenges is going to be as we shift those vehicle miles traveled from commuters going back and forth to work to now we're sending trucks and these deliveries to move goods to people's homes. You're actually looking at vehicles that are actually dirtier than passenger vehicles. And so we actually have the risk of now, because and Tom can expound a little bit on this, but some of the clean air standards requirements for vehicles, there's the light duty passenger vehicles follow certain EPA standards, and they've kind of met those, and they talk about tier 3 fuels and all that, and it really there's been improvements. But we haven't had those same improvements in trucks and more commercial type of trucks. So if we just do business as usual on that end, that can fill up that pollution gap pretty quick with the removal of the commuter vehicles and the increase of vehicle miles traveled by these dirtier vehicles. So it's really critical now that we transition those vehicles over to clean electric vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, James, did I step on you there?
Oh, no, go ahead.
All right. I think that's a really important point, right? It's, one thing that hasn't stopped during the pandemic is supply chain. And there were some pauses and there was some disruption, but it's back up going. And so what we've seen is that 40% reduction in emissions coming from mobile sources. And I'm not talking about, to James' point, it's not kind of the off-road mobile where it doesn't include rail. It does include the heavy duty and light duty trucks. But you're right, like there are cleaner burning fuels that everybody will be using, but there's an issue with diesel. There's an absolute big issue with diesel that we have to focus on. And so electrification is a big point of this. But if we get to a point, and we've been strong proponents of telework for a long time, and for years prior to the pandemic, we ran into kind of three major stumbling blocks, whether it was, and those were attitudes, perceived productivity, and infrastructure. And kind of mid-March, we saw some of those were just fixed, right? Here we are on Zoom, right? Like if I had a flux capacitor and a DeLorean and I go back in time, I'd go to mid-February and buy Zoom stock and then retire. And because who would have thought that this is what we would be doing? And but but there is going to become a bit of a reckoning as we look, because we are hopeful, we're optimistic that there will be a shift, a long-term shift to telework. We did a large-scale telework poll, survey, 7,500 participants spread throughout the state, with employers and employees having two different tracks to find out what people's mindsets were. What we found is that about 95% of people want to continue to telework, but not every day. Only 11% of respondents say every day, with the remainder, whether it's a couple times a week or a couple times a month. And so, this shift to zero driving, like, this is Utah. People like to have their cars. They want to be out. They want to be doing things. And that just is the commuter miles. There's still the to the store miles. There's still the to the mountain miles. There's still out to see family. So we can have a conversation about commuter miles, but still, we got to find ways for people to reduce their emissions for other pieces. And other pieces are going to come back. We are an outdoor community. We love to be in places. And wow. And so we've got to, that's why I think it's fascinating to see how automobile companies are making that commitment to electric. And you're right, it does take some time. But when you have Ford, Audi, Volkswagen, Porsche, Nissan, all these companies that are large-scale manufacturers coming to us and saying, we're going to put multi-millions, billions of dollars behind electric, that's, I think, going to push the market much faster than we've seen in the past. And I go back, I mentioned this earlier in the meeting, but that F-150, that's a real deal, right? You look at the F-150, most popular vehicle in the country, and you drive around just Utah, look at how many F-150s there are. We're a truck culture out here, providing a real electric truck, and that option will then, I think, move into the kind of the larger scale opportunities. That battery technology is advancing faster than we could imagine, provides a speed up. So yeah, we'd love to keep just cars off the road in general. But that's
so Tom, to add on to that, I mean, one of the reasons why we see Tesla right now, their market capitalization, they're the largest auto company in the world. They're bigger now than Toyota, VW, and Honda, which were the top three combined. And there's some speculation behind that, but a lot of it's real. And the primary reason is because they've cracked the battery. They've now figured out how to make a battery and manufacture a battery at below $100 per kilowatt hour, which is the magic point where if you're below that, you can now make a electric vehicle for cheaper than an internal combustion engine vehicle. Once that's cheaper, now to operate that electric vehicle is extremely cheaper. Electricity is cheaper than gasoline. There's fewer maintenance because you don't have moving parts and on and on. And so the total cost of operation is so much lower for electric vehicles. So we've seen this technology breakthrough that's really happened, which is part of the reason why Tesla is now the most valuable car company in the world. They just can't build the factories fast enough to make it. And so now they're quite a bit far ahead than some of these other legacy automakers who are pretty slow behind, to be honest. And they now see the future that they're going to be left behind, which is why, to Tom's point, why Ford is trying to race to hurry up and get the F-150 electric, to get all these other vehicles so they can compete. Because not only like what Tesla's doing, not only with their passenger vehicle, and they're going to have the Cybertruck, they're also going to have an electric semi coming out. And again, what was delaying both those vehicles, the Cybertruck and the semi, was the battery capacity. Can they make enough batteries? And there is a supply chain constriction of batteries. And so now they've had some improvements in manufacturing to really allow now those products to go forward. And we're going to see, my prediction is we're going to see adoption really start taking off. Because once we've crossed that $100 per kilowatt hour battery pack, that's when it's really going to start causing it to take off.
Yeah, one thing to add to that is to take into consideration with all these new electric vehicles coming to market, we're not only going to see more people adopting commuter cars, but as well, we're going to see more companies adopting fleet vehicles. The Ford F-150, all these trucks coming out, the semi trucks, all these different things are going to have an effect on not only the commute, but also the truck on the side of the road doing road construction. You're going to see the construction community kind of have a more mindful, sustainable mindset just because of these individual cars that are coming to market, these trucks coming to market. So we're gonna kind of see maybe a lot of the sinners, I'd say, in air quality turn into maybe a little bit of a saint just because the technology is going to increase in that field of things, and you're going to see a huge improvement there.
I want to address, we've gotten a bunch of questions in, and several actually related to, okay, but if we go all electric, won't bad things happen there too? And so I want to start off with the first question, which is a question about public transportation versus private transportation, and specifically the UTA tracks trains. Don't they use an obscene amount of electricity? Do we know how many people would need to be on each train to be more efficient per person than a private vehicle such as a Nissan Leaf?
Holbrook is in attendance, and so I don't know if we want to just open up, see if she can answer that question. She's a trustee on the UTA board.
We're actually doing a lot of work with UTA on how we can develop and how do we start integrating new technologies in with the existing transit system. So like the questioner was correct. So the tracks trains do use electricity. And what happens is when they go through, they hit these points that are about a mile apart where they just get propelled, they get pushed. And so every mile they get a big push, and that's how it works. And they get a big spike in electricity use, and then it goes away, a spike goes down, spike goes down. So one of the things we're working with UTA right now and with Utah State University in developing some artificial intelligence software where we can now time and coordinate when the train goes by and you get the spike in electricity use with the then charging of the electric buses. And so that way we don't add the load from these electric buses that are coming along to add on top of the spike of the train, but really to fill in the gap. And then if we even have other gaps between, so you have the train go by, spike, you charge the electric bus, the bus is done, then we want to open it up to delivery trucks from like an Amazon or a UPS or whoever, then come in and charge at the same location. So we're looking at creating these intermodal hubs, these designated locations where you're going to get the most efficient and optimized charging. And that way we kind of spread these grid costs, reduce demand charges, and it becomes super efficient, and it also becomes super cheap too. So that way UTA can now operate their train cheaply, their buses cheaply, Amazon can do their delivery trucks cheaply. It can really be a win-win for everybody. So we've been working on that right now, as I said, with Utah State University, and we're pretty excited about the technology that we've been developing.
UTA just put out at the beginning of this month an RFP for 40 to 50 electric buses, right, to James' point. So they are pushing and moving this forward. It's quite exciting.
I have a follow-up question to that, and this one's from Randall. He says, what if in 5 years everyone only owned electric vehicles and local delivery commerce and municipalities did as well? What would the additional electricity generation requirements be, and how would we even do it?
So we've actually done some studies. We did this actually at the University of Utah with some of the engineers where we modeled what would happen if we actually saw an increase. And we looked at it at least 50% adoption, which is pretty significant. Can the existing grid handle that? And the conclusion was yes, we can handle it within there without any additional costs. If we start going above that, then what we'll have to do is start implementing some of these kind of smart charging technologies, like what I just described with what we're working with UTA. And if we do that, which we can do, because right, these vehicles are computers. So you can program exactly when the car to charge. And so as long as then what you start doing is you having the car communicate with the utility, and we know exactly then when is the optimal time to charge, we can coordinate directly with the vehicle. And that would, and actually the consumer doesn't even have to be involved. You can just have that direct communication there. The part of the vision that we're working on is not only how do we do it to where we optimize the existing infrastructure, but also can we time it when we have like surplus solar generation? Because that's one of the challenges with solar is that it produces electricity all at the same time. And one of the biggest challenges is like in the spring when nobody's using electricity and everybody's producing solar and you have so much surplus, the value of that solar generation is not very, it's not worth it because nobody needs the electricity. But if we could time it to where we can now fill up cars when we have this surplus generation, then it can work really nicely. And that's where we're seeing as part of this technology we're developing, where you could be at work, you're working, your car gets, we send a text to you that says, hey, come in and go get a charge. We have great prices because we have surplus generation going on right now, come and fill up. And eventually, if we have autonomous vehicles, you could just let your car go while if you're at home or you're at work, and it can go and get filled up. So I'm very optimistic we'll be able to handle the increase in love. It's not a one-to-one, like you have an increase, battery or car, and then you have to have that exact amount of electricity. As long as we do it smartly and we utilize the most advanced technology, we'll be able to integrate.
Awesome. I had another question from Garth. He says, can the speakers also address the role of electrifying buildings and infrastructure?
I mean, electrification of buildings is a big deal. I mean, we're all for it. I mean, there's a big piece to what James has just talked about, right? Like this element of heat pumps, rooftop solar storage is a big piece of this as well. I mean, these solar farms have been fantastic as we've looked at what's been going on in rural Utah. It's just been a big push to what it looks like to store and generate and reduce emissions through electricity through kind of that heat pump mentality. As far as infrastructure the infrastructure piece is really fascinating, whether it's from a building mindset or even from a roads mindset. And this kind of pivot, just to accept the question, then pivot to something else, the old political strategy that we have in place. This is what I think is the most exciting element that's been going on in the state of Utah and will be happening in the state of Utah as we move forward. This last legislative session, HB 396, which was sponsored by Representative Lowry Snow out of Washington County, the electric vehicle charging infrastructure amendments, which was worked on by a number of great stakeholders, which will allow for the regulated industry or Rocky Mountain Power, the regulated utility Rocky Mountain Power, to put into place vehicle charging infrastructure program, which allows for a $50 million investment through kind of a sunsetting of a STEP program and these available funds that will come through. It coincides with another bill that was run by Representative Spenlow of Salt Lake County, HB 259, which empowers UDOT as well to work with relevant private entities to create a statewide electric vehicle charging network plan and put in place all of that infrastructure. That, I think, is really fascinating as we look at what infrastructure looks like. It's an enormous amount of investment and planning to make it so that this is a real long-term viable solution.
Yeah, before I delve into what we're doing with our big infrastructure program that after this legislation, just to comment a little bit on the buildings. Absolutely, the electrification of buildings is a huge part that is happening right now. We did actually get another piece of legislation where we're able to now provide some incentives for heat pumps for buildings. So if you look at electrification in general, there's four buckets. There's four categories of what is electrification. You have and all what electrification really means is you're just shifting from fossil fuels to a cleaner source of electricity. So transportation is one big sector, buildings being the heating of space and water, and then the third being an industrial processes that use a lot of fossil fuels. And then fourth is the shift over to indoor agriculture. And so what we see is all four of those are going to contribute. The largest potential is transportation, but buildings are a big component as well. And so we're going to start putting in these incentives, which the reason why incentives are important because now it signals to installers, to contractors, to the supply chain, the Lowe's and Home Depots and stuff, go out and get these products, put them into the stores, because now we can start selling them. And heat pumps are really energy efficient. From a total energy basis, they're extremely efficient. So it will actually, they may be a little more expensive on the front end, but over time it will save you money just because of the reduced total energy, whether you're not burning natural gas now to heat, you're heating it with electricity, but they're a very efficient electricity. And it actually lowers your summer electric bill as well. I just installed one of it, and it's a heat pump, and it's been fantastic. So I appreciate the comment on that the role of buildings are going to play in the electrification. And we're actually seeing a lot of new developments happen, apartment complexes where these developers are actually building all electric buildings. And that's kind of the trend. I think that's the trend moving forward, is that we're going to see that there'll be a little bit of a challenge going back and retrofitting buildings, but at least a new construction, I think the all electric is going to be kind of standard moving forward.
Yeah, we've seen actually more interest as we've gone around to different workplaces installing electric vehicle charging stations. We've seen more of an interest in electrifying buildings. And to go along with James' point about heat pumps, they are so efficient, and it kind of has a connection between electric vehicles and also heat pumps. It's just people getting comfortable with this new technology. You know, in other places besides Utah and in the United States, heat pumps are a great way to keep cool inside and to heat a building. We actually we're in the middle of a pilot project with Rocky Mountain Power on a company called PackSize International and up in Salt Lake, and we've been able to track the numbers, the efficiency, and everything. And it's astonishing to see, number one, just how easy. Number two, we installed in a warehouse, and the work environment for these warehouse workers, number one, we're saving money doing this. And number two, the work environment is a lot better for those employees. So all around, it's a great atmosphere for the employees. They're happy because they're keeping cool. The company's saving money, and it's more efficient and just more sustainable in general. And as this new technology is kind of put in and there's more incentives, everything like that, there's going to be more openness, and more people are going to just add it into new construction instead of, like James said, the retrofitting. That's where it gets expensive. But if you compare the numbers and putting in a heat pump versus just a typical HVAC, it's about even. So
since transportation is the biggest category, I know that's been a lot of our focus. We did have a question on whether or not government leaders should promote EV adoption, and is there anything that our local government leaders are doing to that end?
Well, I think Thom had mentioned some of this legislation, and really that's hats off to the legislature. I know they don't get a lot of credit for a lot of the things that they do, but at least there was some foresight to really kind of push this through, especially in the trying budget times that we have. Now, should we have an EV tax credit? That would be fantastic. I would love it if we had an EV tax credit, but in our current budgetary environment, that's probably not going to happen. I would be surprised if it did. But at least what they did do is set up the framework and the policies to really allow now for aggressive EV infrastructure to happen in the state. Most people don't realize that Utah is actually one of the leaders now in the nation. What we've been doing in terms of the partnerships that I know with Rocky Mountain Power has with Leaders for Clean Air and with UCARE and the Department of Transportation and DEQ and UTA. I mean, there's the list goes on and on. But really, with these partnerships, we've really have set up a pretty aggressive now program. We started this in about 2016 when we had, I think in the state that we had about 4 DC fast chargers, where today we have over 70 now. And so it's really been a big push. And what's interesting is you see the increase in electric vehicles from that same period. We've had about 400% increase in the purchase of EVs. In addition to the DC fast chargers, with the work that we've been doing with Britton and Leaders for Clean Air, we've installed about 1,700 level 2 chargers, primarily at workplaces and apartment complexes. So we're starting to put that, and that's what we've done to date. Now that's only a drop in the bucket, it's a start. And what we're going to do moving forward is pretty exciting. And as Thom had mentioned, those legislation that really set up, we're right now working with both the Department of Transportation to really set up a program of how do we ensure the rest of the state is filled in. We have I-15 is electrified. You can go from Salt Lake to Los Angeles, no problem. But how do we get the rest of the state? And so that's things that we're going to be working on moving forward. We're going to be hosting, Rocky Mountain Power is going to be hosting a webinar, sorry for the shameless plug, on September 24th from 10 to 12. And anybody who's listening here, I would encourage you to register for that, where we're going to talk about our program. And I'd love to get feedback and hear from people in the community, see what ideas that they have. And that's really what the purpose of that meeting is for. But as we start moving forward and we do this program that Thom had mentioned, where we can invest up to $50 million to put that in, for the state of our population size, there is no other state doing that much. If you look at it on a per capita, the only one that's kind of close is California, and they're in their own world, so I don't even compare ourselves to what California is doing. But compared to across the country, we are one of the national leaders. And then on top of that, Utah State University just got a National Science Foundation award to create an electric transportation research center. They got a $50 million from the National Science Foundation. And in addition to that, Rocky Mountain Power received 2 Department of Energy grants for $6.6 million and $5 million each to, again, to expand these technologies that we're doing. So all of that got enabled because of these policies that were established. So I think that they don't have the tax credit, which would be great. That would be the next thing to have, but at least they've set up a lot of the policy structure to allow.
I think James is right on right there, right? We're proponents of kind of a chicken and the egg mentality of infrastructure will bring automobiles. And we could have a tax credit to try and bring as many more vehicles here as possible. Or we could do a ZEV program like they have in California, try and bring as many more vehicles as possible. But if we don't address range anxiety first, then switching people from saints to sinners, from sinners to saints, that's not what we want to do. From sinners to saints, it's a much harder leap, right? So if we can go to people through this legislation and investment from Rocky Mountain Power, investments through the state, then that puts us in a long-term solution, like gives us a lot more runway to be successful in the out years. And I think that's really what the state has done, is the perspective the state has, and we're really excited about that. On top of that, though, is the great work that Britton does with Leaders for Clean Air, and that goes beyond what's happening on the roads on I-15. It's electrifying and providing charging infrastructure at your workplace. And so I'm stepping all over what Britton does, but they should, this is a great program that UCare very much supports, that Rocky Mountain Power very much supports, to help businesses find these solutions for their employees. And they have great examples of when you put infrastructure in a building, a vehicle, someone will buy a vehicle, they will fill up as quickly as they can. Sorry to step on that, Britton.
No, you're totally fine. I was just gonna say, as regards to what cities can do, and I'll kind of go over the whole entire thing, but it's shocking to me with our team and how many companies we meet with to install electric vehicle infrastructure, as well as cities. People just a lot of times just don't know about these incentives, and that's where our nonprofit is able to come in and make it simpler for people to install these charging stations. And so I think number one, I think that leaders just in different communities, whether that's business leaders or in government, they just have to be aware of these awesome opportunities to take advantage of right now. There's a lot of options, and we can look at and say, well, if there was just this, or if there was just that, leaders in the community right now are taking advantage of the incentives out there for charging infrastructure to eliminate that range anxiety. But a lot of them are maybe focusing on the things that aren't there and not focusing on the things that are right in front of them. And so I think, very simply, I think people just need to be more aware of how affordable it is right now, and to be able to be that cutting edge, that company that provides charging for their employees. Because charging infrastructure is awesome, but just like what Thom and James have said, it's the start of electrifying Utah. If there's charging infrastructure at a business and a workplace, we've seen that employees are 6 times more likely to actually purchase an electric vehicle when the buying window of purchasing their next car opens. And so that charging infrastructure is so crucial, because for people who go on a weekend vacation to St. George, or go up to Bear Lake, or go up the canyon, whatever it might be, it's going to eliminate the excuses of not driving an electric vehicle, and it's going to open up more more opportunity to drive an electric vehicle. So I just say to be aware, and that's what our nonprofit does. We've partnered, with Rocky Mountain Power, with UCare, and that's been kind of a theme of what we've talked about just on this question. All of us are in this together, and I think as a team between government, Rocky Mountain Power, UCare, as we're all working together to be able to overcome this and have better air quality in Utah. So.
Yeah, so I do have a question then. If electrification is kind of the goal, but we have some barriers to entry, like the range anxiety and all of that, what are you imagining Utah will look like 5 years from now? Will we be able to have more adoption of EVs? Will there be all this infrastructure in place? Like, what is that going to look like in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years?
Well, one of the big differences that's happening now is I think the biggest barrier, and we're talking about electrification, which I think we are putting that infrastructure in place, and we have a plan, and we're doing it. We have the resources now to do it. The other thing that we have to do is get the vehicles and make them cost effective, or at least be competitive. In the next 5 years, we will see EVs now on the lots, or actually the new way to buy an EV online. Like, you can buy a Tesla, you just, instead of spending an entire day at a dealership, with talking to 4 different people, You go on Tesla, you can buy the car within a minute online. And so it's one of those things where I think that type of shift is going to happen. But I do think the biggest change is because of the advances in battery technology, the price of EVs are going to really come down. Depending on what happens in an election too, if you look at what's really driven or pushing EV adoption globally in China and in Europe right now, it's regulation, and those are the big markets that have been going, and that's just because they have requirements to do this. The United States, we do not have that. There's been a slowing of it. We've relied primarily on the market, which is a good thing to a certain extent, which is now Tesla has really been the primary market development. But if we actually move to where there could be more regulation, which will kind of force the automakers to start moving, it's this. There's a lot of business school papers about the dilemma for established industries of when do they transition over to the technology disruption, because the first initial transition, and they're more expensive. So you give up profit to go for this initial, which you have to do to eventually until you get the volumes, and then it's profitable. Tesla's past that. They've done it. They now can make a vehicle profitably. The other ones, they're not there yet. And so they're in this dilemma. Do they wait to do it until they have to, or do they just kind of continually fall behind? But what I see in 5 years is that we'll probably have some form of direct regulation, which will probably either be in the form of some climate carbon restriction or whatever that is, whether it's a carbon tax or even more direct tailpipe emission standards at the federal level, which will force all of them now to do it. And then plus we'll have vehicles that are cost competitive. And so you're going to have an avalanche of product in 5 years, which we'll start seeing on the roads. I think the adoption, we're going to hit the hockey stick in 5 years. It'll take, in that 5 year period, will be right when that hockey stick's starting to go up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I interviewed a guy from Cake Bikes, which is an electric motorcycle company that is based out of here, Park City, but they actually started in Sweden. And he was saying it's so interesting bringing it over to the US because in Europe, a lot of the cities have regulated how many cars can come into the city on a day, and they put really high parking prices, and the goal is to basically make the cities so that you can't have cars in the city, which has made the electric motorcycle market really explode. Whereas here you can still have cars in the city. So what they're seeing is everybody's putting their electric motorbike in the back of their F-150 and driving up somewhere where they can use it in the outdoors or something. I thought that's so interesting. It's just a difference in how the cities are managing cars. So very fascinating. Okay, we've got a bunch more questions in here. How can we ensure that if we start to get more EVs on the road, how can we make sure that those who are least able to afford upfront costs can still benefit from electrification?
I mean, you mentioned something earlier on, and it's the secondary market. It's the used cars, right? What we're seeing now is that there is starting to become a used car market. The issue with a used electric vehicle is the battery. And so as James touched on, as Tesla's become kind of masters of the battery, the key will be, in the out years, in a few years, and not in many years, as that secondary car market hits with electric vehicles, will the battery life be still something that we can afford? And look, I drive a hybrid. I'm not yet there for electrification. It's not yet priced for me, but I look at the price of hybrids just in the last 4 years, how they've become almost in parity with full gasoline vehicles, right? I think it's going to be, and James made this point, right? That cost is going to start dropping and dropping and dropping. We're not necessarily a culture of buying brand new vehicles. And so it's going to take some time. and then it's going to be all about that used car. And once we have a used car market, that's, I think, when everybody's going to have that, the opportunity is just going to be available to everyone. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah, I think it's a great point on the kind of the environmental justice issue associated with EVs. Is that a luxury that only rich people can afford to show off at cocktail parties that they're being sustainable? And can we now encourage or at least allow for this adoption in communities where those communities are actually the most at risk and get the most impacted from air pollution, and where EVs would really have a big impact? We're doing a study with TNC drivers, transportation network companies, of Uber and Lyft. So we've been doing work with those companies in the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and Utah State University, and we've been analyzing the use of electric vehicles. One of the things that we found is a lot of those drivers tend to not be in single family homes, so it's a lot easier to own an electric vehicle when you're in a home. You can plug in whenever you want. If you're in an apartment or that's where the big struggle becomes, especially for low-income neighborhoods, is there sufficient charging to be in there? And right now, we don't really have any charging in low-income neighborhoods. So that's actually going to be one of the components that I am really committed to as part of our new program, is to ensure that we expand the infrastructure in those communities that traditionally, the underrepresented communities. And that's actually part of one of the sub-projects from our Department of Energy grant that we got to look at to do is, can we do these programs to encourage underrepresented communities? So I think that'll be a key part, is to put in some of the charging so those folks can do it, because they can't charge at home. They don't have that capability.
Yeah, I was just going to add in there, the depreciation of electric vehicles is about 20% higher than other vehicles in the first 5 years of owning. And just over time, as more electric vehicles, as Thom was saying, as more electric vehicles are coming to market, there's going to be more used electric vehicles that will be a lot more affordable, especially as the technology continues to increase. And as James said, as Rocky Mountain Power continues to install charging stations, especially in these low-income neighborhoods, and even to tackle the apartment situation as well, with infrastructure, it's going to become more affordable, especially when we're talking about 5 years down the road, or even just 2 years down the road. It's going to become more affordable because we know more about it and the technology continues to advance.
I would like to add too that, I have an article coming out in Utah Business this next month that's entitled "Electric Cars Are Not the Answer, Electric Bikes Are." And that is one of my arguments for the e-bike is it is so far less expensive than a car. Goes 20 miles per hour. You can use the bike lanes. You don't have to pay for parking in a garage. And our city, I even talked with our city planner and our mayor on for the article, and both said that they're actively focused on reducing cars from the road in downtown Salt Lake City, and we've even seen a lot of the roads in Salt Lake City close permanent lanes specifically for bike use already, just in the last couple months. So I think that's also another alternative for lower income or greater availability is, maybe we only have a car or an electric vehicle for long range activities like road trips or heading out for longer distance things. And then we've got a local commuter e-bike that can take us around our immediate area very easily.
Well, Al, that's a really strong point too, especially as we talked earlier in the call about this, the localization of planning, as if telework becomes a real long-term opportunity and solution for us, and maybe we only need a bike to get to Smith's or Harmon's or Walmart or Sprouts, or to, just down the street. I'm all in favor of e-bikes. I love them. As someone who spent 2 years on a bicycle 20 plus years ago in a suit, I never want to get on a bicycle in a suit ever again. I've also gained a lot of weight since then. So this idea of not having to pedal hard, go 20 miles an hour is a huge benefit for me. I love them. So yeah, you've got to convert, to get the whole circular analogy there,
Yeah.
on e-bikes.
All right, we're about to wrap up, but I do have one more question that was asked several times in our Q&A, and that is, there's some concern about, it's great that we're moving away from fossil fuels, but what about all these raw materials we need to make electric batteries? There's precious metals that might require mining in sensitive areas, nickel, the need for nickel, rare earth elements that go into battery production. Is this still a fully more sustainable version than the fossil fuel version we were transferring from?
Yeah, so right now what's happening there in battery development, we're not done yet. So right now there is the use of some heavy metals that are used in the electrodes. So without kind of nerding out in the cathode versus the anode, and then you have an electrolyte in the middle, that they do use so in the cathode, which is where the lithium is stored, you do use a heavy metal that's in there. You can use cobalt, which has a lot of challenges because it's very rare. It's only in Africa. You got the warlords involved and stuff like that. And then they're trying to move over to nickel, and again, these are precious, and so the reuse or the recycling of batteries is an important component. And right now, when batteries are done, there's still about 60% battery left, and so there's a big race. And how do you reuse these batteries, or do you get those metals back out of that battery instead of mining it somewhere else? So that's on the current kind of battery design. And these big advancements that I was talking about earlier, that Tesla's made, has really primarily been on the manufacturing side. Hasn't been a big breakthrough in the battery chemistry, just in the ability to manufacture and process it. However, this next generation, which is going to be a truly breakthrough, there's been some papers in Nature, which is one of the leading scientific journals, that talks about being able to develop these batteries without the use of these rare metals. And so that's going to be that next generation battery. And there's been so much excitement around there, because not only that, you can increase energy density, which means now you can have like the flying taxis, and you can really have electric planes and stuff like that it's being set up. So when that happens, we can eliminate some of those concerns around those heavy metals that are being used in that. But that's definitely in the current batteries that are in vehicles today, that is an aspect that has to be either recycled or reused. But I think the next generation battery will be addressing that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I feel like we could talk for another couple hours more. I still have a bunch of questions on my list that I didn't get answered. But for those of you that questions we didn't get to, I am going to hand those over to the panelists so they can answer you offline. And just thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.